Welcome to the Estates Made Simple podcast with Jenna Carvalho and VanderLeek. We are on a mission to simplify the world of estate administration, helping executors gain the knowledge required to manage an estate. Please note, the following is for informational purposes only and is not to be considered legal, tax, or financial advice. We recommend you seek individualized advice for your unique situation with qualified professionals.
Welcome to the Estates Made Simple podcast. We have a very special episode today. Before we get into that, let's do the introductions, which is my name is VanderLeek. I'm founder and managing lawyer of VanderLeek Law here in town, and have my co-host with us today, Jenna Carvalho of Guardian Estate Company. Welcome, Jenna, to the podcast.
Thanks, Gord.
Yeah, and this is a special one. And it feels like it's a little bit, Jenna, that the spotlight's on you. Remember, it wasn't too long ago we had it where you put me in the hot seat. It feels like we're turning the tables a little bit and maybe talking about some themes and some different tips. We're doing that in the context and want our audience to know that Jenna is stepping away as the co-host. In a moment, she could speak to a little bit of the reasoning for that, which makes me sad because these were the times when we did do these recordings, and our conversations on this was always a welcome reprieve from the day-to-day legal work that we could look at forward to doing the podcasting. But we'll speak at the end about my plans for the podcast. So we're not going away. It's going to continue on. So thank you if you are a regular subscriber to joining in. But we thought in this episode it may be helpful to maybe get a little reflective and nostalgic of our time together. And I guess we're both share some different thoughts about the last number of podcasts that we've been doing. I think for 2.5 years, right, that we've been at this, and it's been a ton of fun. But as life circumstances happen, the word pivot and transitioning and stuff was all far too used up in the pandemic. But things do change and you have to adjust to that. And this is a bit of an episode where we wanted to do some reflection on that and give Jenna an opportunity to share a little bit about what's happening and some of her decision making, which we want to honor and also celebrate some of the work that we've done together. Yeah, Jenna, maybe share with our audience a little bit about some of the decision making and what led up to that.
Yes, to mimic your comments, I will say that it has been a pleasure chatting over the past 2.5 years about all things estate administration. I think we're both passionate about this topic and love educating the market. When I'm thinking about the next year or so, I'm thinking about a lot of big projects that are up and coming with my own company. And as well as my growing family, I just need to focus on those projects. And to make room for those things, I have to step away from some of the things that I love, but it's just time to make some room. I will miss chatting with you every week, although you're not going to be rid of me. We're going to see each other quite often.
We serve on committees together,
yes.
And we're in the same field, so we run into each other, which is a good thing. And yeah, I definitely wanted to share with the audience that in a way there's some positives to this, although it feels like a loss, which is a negative, but it just means you're going to be having to focus on doing the priorities, which is stuff we all have to do as we're weighing what we're committed to and evaluating our time so we can be doing the best job for the primary commitments.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe you could have a really cool new podcast host that just opens your eyes to new worlds, right? You never know.
You never know. Right now, it feels there's no host I could ever find that would compare to Jenna. So I don't know that would be the case, but I will talk a little bit about some of my thoughts and plans, and we'll communicate. I'm going to use this as an opportunity, I think, to do some enhancements or do some new things. So hopefully it's all going to be positive from our listeners' perspective. But what I thought for this session, we could take a few minutes just to talk about a few things. I came up with the 3 T's: tips, trends, and themes, as a way to maybe galvanize a little bit of our thinking for the past number of episodes over the last 2.5 years, and maybe some parting thoughts or wisdom, Jenna, for you as we go through it. So maybe let's talk about some of the tips. Everybody loves a tip, and it's maybe, why don't we start with, if you had to leave a tip for the audience that would be helpful in the context of all the episodes we've done geared towards estate administration, what would that be?
I think I've said this almost every episode since we've chatted. It's my main tip is around communication. Communication is key when you're administering an estate, communicating with the necessary beneficiaries, all other stakeholders, advisors, anyone related to the estate. Communication is the number one tool to reduce conflict, reduce unanswered questions, reduce suspicions, and to build trust. And so if as an executor, if you can only do one thing, it would be communicate. The good and the bad news is better than no news at all. It is interesting because this past weekend, I had the opportunity to join a family meeting where the parents as well as the beneficiaries were in the room having this discussion before anyone passed away. And the parents communicated their plan with respect to the estate. And it was such a powerful moment because I thought, how many families wish they could have had this conversation prior to death and be in that room and ask those questions and build those connections. And we've talked about estate administration, but I would also stress that if you're in a position to do your will or do your estate plan and you want to communicate it to your beneficiaries, I would highly recommend you do so because it's an amazing moment. And just, I think great things come out of that.
Yeah, no, that is powerful. And while we focus this podcast on being of assistance to executors and administrators, having that in place from a planning perspective, we think about reducing contention, but just it's more fulsome, more meaningful, I think, for the beneficiaries, in this case, the kids, right? If parents pass away, to go, here's the plan. And they're going to go, yeah, the executor's executing on the plan. That's all good. Excellent points. And you can't stress that enough. We see that all the time in our practices. And good tip on that. For me, of late, and I've seen it before, we've touched on it in terms of some contentious stuff, just remind us a tip just to check the beneficiary designations. A lot of times people forget about them, and it could actually be a significant well. I think in the past we've talked about, for example, in a blended family, if the RSP goes to your children instead of your spouse, say second spouse, now there's this inherent tax liability. And I've certainly seen that of late, but it's a theme that I guess if I look at that, it talks about planning in general, but the specific tip would be really make sure you check your beneficiary designations. It has the same effect as a will. It's going to direct assets to a particular destination on your death, and which is what the will does, right? But it's not governed by the terms of the will. And it's just often misunderstood. People aren't aware of it, or it just creates lots of stresses if it's done improperly. I think in a prior episode, we talked about there was a former spouse who ended up getting some money instead of the kids, or second spouse, right? Which is probably where the person intended had forgotten about the beneficiary designation that had the first spouse. And so now there's a big fight that goes on as to, in terms of where those money goes. And often it could be insurance or RSPs or TFSAs, which can have a significant amount of value attached to them. And there's always this sense of, is that what the person intended? Right? And creates that gap between the actual result and the intention. And I think I've said that before, where I see my job as a lawyer is there needs to be no gap between those two things. What the person intended is the result and what the actual result is. When there's a gap in those two, then it leaves a really poor taste in the family's mouths, if you will, regarding the plan. And it makes it enhance difficulties for the executor, right? And in terms of carrying out the wishes. So yeah, hopefully some good tips for our listeners on that. The other thing I thought as a category, just to pick your brain and again, put you in the hot seat for your parting wisdom here, is on trends that you've seen over years on that. What would you pick as your top trend?
My top trend would really be around choice of fiduciary. I'm finding that many families are no longer choosing their children to act as executor and trustee for their estate. They're looking elsewhere, whether that be a family member, a friend, or perhaps a professional. And for a couple of different reasons. One, I think families are getting more complex. There's blended families. Assets are becoming more complex. And then also children are moving outside of the province or outside of the country, which definitely makes it difficult to administer an estate. And so people are looking to these other outside sources to act. And I think that's a good thing because oftentimes these professional executors are more experienced and they have the processes and procedures in place to take on an estate of varying complexity. Are you in line with that thought? Is that something similar in your practice as well?
Yes, certainly a trend I've seen in the industry is an increased rise of the use of professional executors, trust companies, but there's other companies that are getting into the game, right? I think I see that as a definite need in the marketplace because more and more people are going, my kids can't handle it
Yeah.
and all the responsibilities. And I don't want to burden my friends and my siblings because, well, they're trying to slow down or they want a vacation in a warm climate and this would burdensome for them. Or they're starting to say, thanks, but no thanks. I'm at that stage in life where I'm trying to rationalize and I want to do other things. I don't want to be an executor, right? So I think we're seeing people more and more stuck with who do I choose? The choices are less obvious. As an overall trend, I think that's a fair comment. And so we see an increased rise in the use of professional executors or people that becomes more and more appealing to work in there. I think my trend that I've seen is, and maybe not going back 20 years, but I would say probably in the last 2 or 3 years, a trend that more and more people are utilizing the internet and feel that sort of gives them that professional designation or the equivalency of that. And of course, of late, it's accelerated with the advent of AI, ChatGPT and other LLM models are seemingly giving us really good advice. But I've seen situations where you plug in a question that needs to give a legal answer and it's wrong. It's just dead wrong. Or people come in going, I've figured it all out because I put it into Google or into ChatGPT. And with all respect to those search engines or those LLMs, I think there's enhanced need for that human interaction and that professional advice. Having said that, I acknowledge right off the top, that's a self-serving comment because I'm in that field. So I may be a little biased, but trying to be as objective as I can on that. It really highlights the need for that human interaction and that discernment and sometimes just judging the emotional side of what's going on and strategies that would keep families together, not tear them apart. AI is not going to take that into consideration. That's where you got to customize a plan and it isn't a one size fits all. And the internet's going to give you the answer or the internet's going to write your will or what's the planning, right? And which becomes so important. So I guess as a bit of a trend, cautionary is use the internet maybe to gain information and to do some research. And that may make you ask better questions of your lawyer. I think that a good use of AI would be, here's my situation. I have a blended family and I have this much by way of assets. What are 5 questions I should ask my estate planning lawyer? They may do a very good job in a very short order of asking questions you wouldn't have thought of. And it improves the quality of that interaction with a professional. I think that's appropriate. Right? Where use it as that tool, but just be careful that it's not gonna solve those problems. You still need that professional advice to make it easier on your executors. And so I see a trend that people come in thinking they've got it all squared away because they have high-speed internet and access to these access. And I think there are dangers. There's a use for it. It's not going away. It's part of what we all have to deal with. But I think there's a caution there. So I see a trend that there's too much reliance on that, but using those tools I think in a constructive way to help educate you so you're making progress. Like maybe you weren't sure how to get started or you're going, let's find what are the top 3 estate planning lawyers in town. It'll help you take the next step. So if it's good for that, it's not going to solve the problems, but it'll help you make movement and action. Then I would say that's a good thing. But I see it too much reliance on it. In some cases, people think it's gonna solve all these problems. And it's not, I don't think it's there yet. It's not intended for that.
No, and maybe in 10 or 20 years it will be there. But I agree with you. I think it can be quite dangerous to rely on these technologies to give advice. And I think it's similar to the investment industry in some ways, because you could just put all your money in ETFs and pay a low fee, but then you don't get that emotional connection with an individual who's talking about your goals and your plans and your family and how this money will support your family when you're gone and taking you through the roller coaster of the market ups and downs and when to hold on tight versus liquidating because you're scared. I think all of those things are highly valuable in a relationship, much like it is with a lawyer. I agree on that sentiment, Gord.
Yeah, exactly. I guess the last segment we wanted to get into, the last T of the 3 T's was themes, and maybe just some time to reflect on over the last 2.5 years or themes in the industry or what's happening I guess maybe I'll start on that. And I think because I'm involved, what I've seen, and it's interesting in some of our episodes, we have said, while the focus is on estate administration and helping executors, we often get back into planning, which I think is belying the fact that a good plan helps reduce the stress, improves the probability of smooth sailing on the role of the executor, which we've said over and over is a big job. It's a lot of work. So anything that you could do as a theme, it would be fair if we look at different situations. Good planning is going to reduce the stress on that. It could reduce conflict. It could, if you're thinking things through ahead of time. Put another way, if you look at estates gone badly, typically you could say that there was either no planning or not really good planning. It was things were not thought through carefully. So really, I think that's a theme through all the episodes is if you want to make the work of your nominated executor to be easier, put a good plan in place. That's your responsibility. You can't dump a mess on an executor and say, it's their problem, not my problem. That's for the state gone badly, right? Yeah. And there could be all sorts of negative repercussions on that. So I think I see that as a theme that is interwoven into many, if not all of our podcasts is good planning is at the heart of successful estate administration.
I think that's a great point. And for me, a common theme would be looking back at all the podcasts. I think we've had over 70 or 72 by now. We've touched on different topics for each podcast. And it just highlights the fact that each estate is so unique. And we're not going to have all of the topics that we discussed part of every estate. And so I think for an executor, if they're going online and finding a checklist to go through the estate administration, just for them to know that every item that they'll need to deal with isn't on that checklist because each estate has its own assets, its own factors, its own beneficiaries, its own facts of the deceased. And yeah, for executors to seek out some help and some professional assistance along the way, I think serves them quite well.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, Jenna, maybe even just some parting advice or thoughts, right, to leave our audience as we've got some themes and some tips and some trends that we've highlighted for the past 70 plus episodes. But yeah, any parting thoughts as we wrap up the podcast?
Something that comes to mind is really the fact that this is such an interesting industry to be in. And so even if a young person is listening, to think about their career path, estate administration planning is really fascinating. And so just considering that as your choice I think is a great idea. And then for our executors listening, you can do a good job if you have the right people in your corner and you have the right tools at your disposal. And so just being thoughtful in your approach and who you're bringing in on your team is going to lead you really far in estate administration. And for all of our executors listening, you can do a good job if you have the right professionals in your corner and the tools at your disposal. So it's really about being thoughtful in your approach and making sure you have the right resource to do a great job. I really appreciate all of our listeners tuning in and listening to all these topics because I know estate administration can be a little dry at times, but it's going to be affecting every Canadian and every family. And so these are really important topics to educate yourself on and make sure you're aware. So I appreciate all of you listening in. And thank you, Gord, for all of the time you spent in this podcast and giving us your advice. And it's been such a pleasure learning from you and chatting with you and listening to your stories. More to come. I know we talked about me coming in as a guest in future episodes. So I look forward to that invite and look forward to where you take this podcast, Gord.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. I just echo those sentiments. We see that as well. Always encouraging people to say, this is an interesting area of the law. It's complex and interesting. There's never a dull moment and every situation is unique, right? Every family's different. So it's not boring. So yeah, an encouragement on that on my end as well. I think we need to attract more people into this industry because the workload as with the aging population is just going to increase. And we certainly see that as well. Yeah, I think for me, as we wrap up here, just the thought of it's been fun to do the teaching. Selfishly, if I wasn't a lawyer, I'd probably be a teacher. So I love this stuff. I love going in, but just a real heartfelt gratitude, Jenna, to you. Because I remember at the time, I think it's fair to say we would not have got through this many episodes had it not been for you. And I say that because it started with, I guess I could have done this on my own, but it started with me. I think we had a lunch together and I pitched the idea, well, let's continue these good conversations we regularly have, but let's turn a microphone on and record it. Maybe there's some benefit of that, right? And the fact that we could do it together really got me over the hump of getting it started, right? And you did certainly a tremendous amount of work, which I'm going to be hard pressed to replace, but I will do my best. Just in terms of thinking of the ideas, you behind the scenes, you did all creating all the outlines and coming up with ideas and just collaborating on that has made it a lot of fun and made it easier to get it started. So I guess looking at it, although there's a sadness to saying we're not going to do this together, that it's for me, I think, an opportunity to carry on still with the same theme of Estates Made Simple. We're still going to continue the podcast to talk about these things, but to re-engage it more, maybe more guests. I think it's nice to have a conversation, and it's been great to be able to do that. I think some of the guests that we've had on, those have been interesting episodes. I've learned a lot just by listening to the guests. So I think a bit of the theme of when you want to do bigger projects, it's sometimes helpful on the road if you have a companion. And I think that would be the case here. I could definitely say that it was made easier and more fun to collaborate. Our listeners are, if you're seeing a problem, if you do it together with somebody else, you bring in some assistance, it's more likely to happen and it's more enjoyable if you have those interactions. So I'm just really grateful that you said yes 2.5 years ago. And then we got started on this because it's been a great start. And I hope to carry on the legacy that we started because I think it is important work. So yeah, to our listeners, the podcast is not going away. It may be a different brand. It may look a little different, but the themes will be the same of providing good education and trying to make it simpler and understandable. While there's a certain complexity with estates, I guess our goal is to try to simplify it so that it's understandable, actionable on these items. So I've got looking forward to new guests and to enhance and improve what has been a great start. So I'm really genuinely grateful, Jenna, for being part of that start. I know in our circles, you're not going away. We'll have chances for interaction, but for your contribution, it's been significant and very appreciative of you saying yes and being a great contribution, right? I think you've always brought a unique perspective as part of your journey. So it's been fun interacting as two professionals in the same space. To be able to do that, it's always been a pleasure, and wish you well in these projects and the time commitment. Totally understand that sometimes you have to say, I can't do everything. I think that's smart. That shows you're astute, saying you're recognizing that there's only so much time. You have to be committed to the family. And that's a huge responsibility, right? That's beyond our work. That's number one responsibility. So I think it shows you have your priorities in the right spot. And a genuine thank you on my behalf for your contributions to the podcast.
Thank you, Gord. I'll be listening from behind the scenes.
There we go. For our listeners, if you haven't, and this is the first time you're listening in, please subscribe so you don't miss any episodes, and reach out to myself if there's any questions or there's topics you have covered. We'd be happy to take that into consideration as we move forward.